When I, a young 25-year-old man, decided to celebrate my engagement to Katie, my high school sweetheart and life partner for 8 years, this event coincided with another important moment in our family's life. My younger brother Patrick was just finishing his studies at community college, and my parents took this as an excuse for their own holiday party in his honor. In the midst of preparing for our celebration, which I was looking forward to, my parents suddenly asked me to cancel our engagement party to make room for Patrick's graduation. I was stunned by this offer, because the invitations to our engagement had already been sent out. Katie and I have been carefully preparing for this moment, dreaming of sharing the joy with our loved ones and friends. It was an exciting, special stage in our lives, and I hoped that the family would support us. However, when I shared our plans, the reaction was not at all what I expected. My parents and Patrick insisted that my brother's graduation party should take place on the same day, although they had not even mentioned it before. I suggested a reasonable solution, in my opinion, to postpone Patrick's graduation celebration, since invitations to his event have not yet been sent out. However, this proposal was met with misunderstanding and even some disappointment on the part of my parents. They have always highlighted Patrick's successes, and this has been felt throughout my life. In my childhood and youth, I often noticed that my achievements remained in the shadows. For example, on my 5th birthday there was only a small, modest gathering, whereas at Patrick's every holiday turned into a carefully organized event with themed parties and a large number of guests. Such differences could not but leave an imprint on my perception of family relationships. But despite this, I tried to keep in warm touch with my parents and brother, and kept in touch on holidays and important dates. However, the engagement situation has exacerbated long-standing disagreements. Instead of the joy that should have accompanied the preparation for my momentous event, the situation brought mixed feelings to our family and caused tension that, like an invisible shadow, lay over our relationship. A long-standing dynamic that seemed long forgotten or muffled surfaced at exactly the moment that was supposed to be unifying for all of us. My parents, with whom I maintained more formal than warm relations, did not expect me to communicate often, nor did I expect them to. We all got used to this unspoken agreement and perceived it as the norm, which for years suited us all. However, it was different with Patrick. Our relationship, since childhood, has always been strained. We often quarreled, often exchanged not only offensive words, but also blows. These conflicts have left a deep mark on our fraternal bond. In high school, we deliberately began to avoid discussing Patrick's personality and behavior, because his upbringing, filled with unconditional support and condescension from his parents, formed traits in him that made him difficult to communicate. In high school, Patrick showed a penchant for entrepreneurship, but his projects were not successful. He once launched a startup selling graphic print t-shirts, but the business collapsed as soon as it started. Nevertheless, even when the parents lost their invested funds in this failed project, they continued to support Patrick. Over the years, I got used to the fact that any of his mistakes or failures remained without criticism. When the time came to go to college, his grades limited his choice of educational institution, and he eventually enrolled in a community college, where he received a degree in business. At the same time, an important turn in my life took place. I proposed to my longtime friend Katie, and we enthusiastically began planning our engagement. It was our time, a moment that I wanted to share with my loved ones. However, my parents apparently did not share this attitude. The coincidence of dates with Patrick's graduation was the beginning of a new wave of family disagreements. Even though the invitations to his event hadn't been sent out yet, they insisted that I cancel or reschedule my event. When I refused to give in and offered a compromise, to postpone Patrick's graduation, my parents expressed dissatisfaction. Our conversation on the phone turned into a heated argument in which I was accused of being hostile to my brother. I understood that this situation could not be resolved peacefully, so I firmly stated that our celebration would take place as planned, after which I ended the conversation and decided to withdraw from communication for a while in order to avoid further conflicts. When the invitations to both events were sent out, confusion began in the family. The relatives, caught between two fires, did not know where to go, and I decided not to involve them in this drama, allowing everyone to make their own choice. I informed them that I would be glad to see them at our party, but I would also respect any decision they made. However, I soon found out that my parents actively urged relatives not to come to my engagement party. They spread false information, claiming that I deliberately combined my event with Patrick's graduation to create a conflict. Faced with this smear campaign, I felt compelled to act. I decided to explain the situation directly to each guest in order to put everything in its place. Openly and honestly, without unnecessary aggression, I talked about how events really unfolded. As a child, I always felt like I was in the shadow of my brother. Patrick, the family's favorite, occupied the entire space, and his achievements constantly stood out. The pattern of favoritism that has always existed in our family has persisted and is now fully manifested. Although over the years I've learned to accept this reality and come to terms with the fact that Patrick's achievements will always be in the spotlight, I couldn't let my parents' expectations about canceling my important event cross the line. I made it clear to my relatives that if they would rather believe their parents' words than my version of events, it might be better if we stopped all contact. My message was extremely honest, and although I was worried about their reaction, the support I received exceeded all my expectations. Many relatives, especially those who were closer to my age, immediately expressed understanding and assured me that they would attend my party. It was a great relief to me. The party was really a success, and almost all the guests came. It was clear that they had not succumbed to the false statements of my parents that I had allegedly planned my celebration so that it would coincide with Patrick's graduation. In fact, the guests at the event shared their observations and confessions that they had long been aware of the injustice that I faced while being in the shadow of my brother. It kept me going that night, not only because the event was fun and successful, but also because many family members finally saw the real picture of how I was always compared to Patrick. The next day, a new, difficult situation occurred. My parents and Patrick, without waiting for an invitation, appeared on the doorstep of our house with the clear intention of finding out the relationship. The conversation began with accusations that I had allegedly sabotaged Patrick's graduation out of jealousy and a desire to outshine him. This accusation was so far from the truth that I was filled with indignation. They claimed that almost no one came to his party, and those who came left shortly after the start, probably to attend my engagement. They were upset not only by the low attendance, but also by the fact that I sent out my message explaining my point of view. In the midst of this confrontation, I tried to explain my actions, pointing out that I was forced to clarify the situation after they started spreading false information. I wanted to protect my name and reputation without resorting to manipulation and lies. Unfortunately, my parents and Patrick didn't want to listen. Their aggressive accusations continued, and it became obvious that no productive conversation would come out. The tension grew, and I felt that anything I said would only exacerbate the conflict. When the atmosphere was heated to the limit, the police had to be called to stop this mess. Contrary to my expectations, my parents left our house with fury, showering insults, and Patrick, slamming the door, almost broke it, venting his anger in a last desperate gesture. This confrontation, although painful, highlighted one obvious truth: the problems in our family are deeply rooted. The dynamics of the relationship, based on the constant comparison and preference of one child to another, has reached its apogee. It became clear to me that clearer boundaries were needed, perhaps even a constant distance, in order to maintain peace and stability in my relationship with Katie and focus on our future. Shortly after my parents and Patrick left, I received a message from an unknown number. Katie and I assumed it was someone from their entourage, since all their rooms were blocked after the last conflict. The message expressed disappointment that I chose this day for my engagement when Patrick graduated. They mentioned that Patrick felt ashamed that he had only graduated at the age of 29, and that his business failures had left him no reason to be proud. The message claimed that his parents were only trying to cheer him up, and that their criticism of me came from desperation over the failure of the graduation. The tone of this message was strangely contradictory. On the one hand, there was an apology in it, which could be a sign of sincere remorse. On the other hand, it was like another attempt at manipulation, a desire to make me feel guilty. Katie was as confused as I was. This left us with an ambivalent impression: either it was an attempt to redeem ourselves, or just another ploy to sway our decision. My mother, always more reserved and quiet compared to my father and Patrick, seemed sincere in her intention to establish a relationship when she appeared on our doorstep. Katie and I were just getting ready for work, and the unexpected appearance of my mother caused mixed feelings, from mild anxiety to the hope of a more peaceful communication. Deciding that this might be a chance to clear up misunderstandings, I let her into the house. Unlike the previous stormy meetings, when all three of them, my parents and brother, came together, this meeting promised to be more calm and devoid of those electrified emotions that used to dominate our conflicts. She began the conversation by apologizing for recent events, which, according to her, were an unexpected and unpleasant ordeal for everyone. My mother admitted that my father and Patrick's behavior was inappropriate and said they were sorry for how things turned out. She assured me that no one wanted to worsen the situation, but only tried to protect the honor of the family. At first glance, her apologies seemed sincere to me, but as we talked, I began to feel a little annoyed. They expressed regret not for specific actions, but for the consequences that these actions caused. When the mother moved on to a more personal topic, her tone became softer, but there was a certain reproach in her words. She expressed respect for my relationship with Katie, adding that she has long considered her a part of our family. However, she was particularly alarmed by the incident with the police, when Katie threatened to call her father. My mother considered this an act of disrespect to their family, especially because our wedding had not yet taken place, and, as she put it, Katie had not yet officially become obliged to the family. This comment struck a chord with me, as if our relationship with Katie needed some kind of formal confirmation in order for her to protect her home and her interests. I calmly but firmly explained to my mother that Katie's reaction was justified. My parents and Patrick showed up uninvited, contrary to any social norms, and immediately began with accusations and aggressive behavior, leaving us no opportunity for a peaceful dialogue. They, not us, escalated the situation, and if Katie hadn't threatened to call the police, the consequences could have been even worse. My irritation grew with every word. Even now, when everything could be discussed calmly, my mother continued to insist that Katie should have respected my father, as if this respect should have been unconditional, regardless of their behavior. When her mother mentioned that Katie should apologize, it was the last straw. I said bluntly that none of us are going to apologize because we didn't do anything wrong. On the contrary, they, my parents and Patrick, had to apologize for the way they invaded our space, regardless of our borders. I made it clear that Katie is my family, and her rights and feelings are above all for me. Regardless of whether my parents consider her part of the family or not, it doesn't matter to me at all. She is my support, my companion in life, and I will protect her as she protects our home. This conversation did not lead to the desired reconciliation. My mother seemed unable to truly understand or accept that her actions, her expectations, and demands no longer had power over me. I asked her to leave with restraint but decisively. Continuing this conversation would be pointless, since her presence only prolonged the conflict and reminded us that even at moments when it seemed that we were moving towards reconciliation, true understanding between us was never achieved. My mother left our house with an expression of bitterness on her face, and I was left with a feeling of deep disappointment. She resisted at first, unwilling to accept the new boundaries that I had clearly outlined. The argument gradually flared up, emotions were heating up. My mother, as always, tried to use her usual tactic, to appeal to feelings, reminding me of family ties, but this time I remained steadfast. Finally, in desperation, she said that if I really intended to stop all contact with them, then they would do so, although her voice betrayed bitterness and disappointment. After she left, Katie and I stayed at work, digesting everything that had happened. Although time was lost, I felt that, at least temporarily, an important decision had been reached. This painful interaction, despite all the hardships, finally gave me what I had long craved: clear boundaries. I realized that from that moment on, any uninvited appearances of my parents at our house would entail calling the police. I was determined to protect our peace and not let family conflicts ruin my life with Katie. 5 weeks have passed since that day, and life seems to have returned to a relatively calm course. Katie and I enjoyed the fact that family dramas were no longer a constant shadow over our relationship. However, it turned out that the calm before the storm was deceptive. One evening, when we had almost forgotten about the last quarrels, Katie's parents called us. They told me about a strange meeting with my parents that happened the day before. My parents unexpectedly showed up at their house late at night, under the pretext of discussing the terrible behavior of Katie and me. Katie's parents, being tactful and balanced people, did not immediately understand what was happening and politely accepted them. However, it soon became clear that my parents had not come for reconciliation or constructive conversation. They started complaining about me, praising Patrick as the perfect son, who, according to them, sacrificed everything in order to take care of them. The reality, of course, was different. Patrick could not afford to live separately, and his sacrifice was only that he had nowhere to go. But, as always, the parents preferred to ignore this truth. As the conversation dragged on, Katie's parents noticed that my parents might have had a drink before the visit. This only reinforced the absurdity of the situation. They started accusing Katie of disrespecting them during the last meeting, claiming that she had changed for the worse since our engagement. They even hinted that her modesty and quiet demeanor in the past were just a pretense. At the end of the visit, my parents revealed their plan, which seemed both ridiculous and frightening in its recklessness. Neither of the parties, neither they nor Katie's parents, had to pay for our wedding, in the hope that financial pressure would force us to apologize and return to their favor. When Katie and I heard about this, we couldn't help but laugh. This plan seems so ridiculous. Katie's parents, fortunately, took everything with understanding, assuring us that there was no need to worry and that they would not allow my parents to interfere in our relationship. I was sincerely grateful to them for their support and calmness in such a situation. Nevertheless, I decided that it was time to take additional measures. I unblocked my parents' phone numbers for a while to send them a clear message. Their visits to Katie's family must stop, otherwise I will be forced to go to court. Although it was more of a bluff, I hoped that this reminder would deter them from further attempts to interfere in our lives. Almost a year has passed since then. I didn't maintain any contact with my parents and Patrick, and during this time, Katie and I have only strengthened our lives. We got married 3 months ago, in a cozy and warm ceremony, surrounded only by our closest ones. The wedding went great, and everything was like a fairy tale, despite the absence of my parents. We recently returned from our honeymoon, which was a great starting point for a new chapter of our life together. My parents and Patrick never tried to get in touch with us after the wedding, which was a real relief. The lack of drama allowed us to start a family life without unnecessary stress and anxiety. Now that I look to the future, all I see is a happy life with Katie. She is my reliable companion, and I feel that with her I can cope with any difficulties that come our way. I am finally free from family strife and ready to build a new life without looking back.